After a price decrease in basically the complete GT3 market, prices stabilized during 2023. Every quarter I update you and will continue to update you on the latest developments in the GT3 market. These updates revealed a drastic shift in price dynamics that imply good news for owners and bad news for those of you waiting for a cheap GT3. Let's dive into the latest price trends of the different generations, compare them to the rest of the market and speculate about 2024. Starting with the 992, split by the touring and non-touring models, we can see that prices came down rapidly after their introduction, but stabilized in the beginning of 2023. And this means that 992 non-tourings lost only 2.8% during last year. 2.8%. That's an absurd number for a new car. Now I looked a little bit deeper into this and I found that this flat development is mainly driven by the cars with more than 2000 miles. The brand spanking new ones decreased a bit. The touring lost slightly more and is down by 6.7%. As a result, we can see that the price premium towards the normal model decreased during 2023. At the moment it's only $10,000. Yet, the uncertainty in this trend is also a bit higher as the market supply is lower. Now the scarcity of the GT3 is not only reflected by the low depreciation rate, but also by the absolute price level. These cars are still priced extremely high. If you go to the configurator and choose a high-spec option with ceramics, a special color, a $15,000 exclusive interior and some other bits and bobs, you end up with an MSRP of $240,000. As you can see, such a high spec would be well below the market price for a used example. Nevertheless, even these used examples are selling extremely quickly, but more about that later. You see, you don't need to spend this amount of money to benefit from the stable prices. Also 991s are holding up very well. Approximately $140,000 will do the trick as well. Over here we have the trends for the 991.1 and 991.2. Prices of course increased during the pandemic, topped in the summer of 2022 and, yet again, stabilized during 2023. Potentially, prices are supported by the high 992 prices. Last year they only decreased by 3.1% in the 991.1 market and by 1.6% in the .2 market. In monetary terms these rates equal $4.4 and $3,000. Again, absurdly low rates. We can see some volatility in the summer, and I think it will be interesting to see how much of this volatility is driven by seasonality. Now if we adjust these trends for inflation, we can see that you hardly lost anything if you already had the car in your possession in January 2020. Compared to the pre-pandemic price level, .1s are down by 3.1% and .2s by 1.6%. Let's continue with the 997s. Over here we have the combined trend for the .1s and .2s. And this reveals that prices topped in 2022, just like they did in the rest of the market, but never came down from the top. And this is fairly unique. There are only a handful of cars for which I'm tracking the prices that show this kind of price stability. During 2022 there was a bit more volatility, but we need to keep in mind that the market is only small. That is also the reason why we can only look at the .1 separately. If we do this, we can see that prices are up by 2.5% or $3,000 compared to last year. Supply hovers between 3 and 16 cars, and this is barely enough to get some reliability into this trend. .2 supply unfortunately can sit for long periods at 1 or 2 cars, so we're not going to look into that trend. Also the 996 market is very small and has a high price uncertainty, but we can dig a little bit deeper into that. You see, if we look at the trend for the 996, we can see a large confidence interval that indicates a high price uncertainty. However, in this market there are big differences between the high and low mileage cars. If we split the price development by the different mileage categories, we can see that it are the low mileage cars, so the ones up until 11,000 miles that lost the most. Cars with more than 23,000 miles have been stable since the beginning of 2022. Of course, there are some fluctuations as the market is small, but the trend is obvious, right? Combining all these numbers, we end up at minus 1.5% for the 996 GT3. Translating this back to the high level trend, this seems about right if we focus on the confidence interval. Prices came down a bit since the summer, but are not vastly lower than last year. Are you still with me after all of those numbers? Let's summarize them and then compare them to the rest of the market. In this overview we have all the depreciation rates of last year. On average, prices only came down by 1.3%, highlighting that this market is extremely resilient. The highest depreciation rates we find in the 991.1 and 992 market, and the lowest one in the 997 market. But especially on the negative side, we're looking at differences of a few percentage points. Factoring in some randomness, the differences become even smaller. Now I think you already know what this means for the market comparison, right? GT3s outperformed the market. Let's have a quick look at the market trend and find out by how much the GT3 outperformed. Car prices surged during the pandemic, topped mid-2022 and then decreased with above average rates. During 2023, we saw that depreciation rates flattened to normal values for some cars, but definitely not for all. Up until mid-2022, this pattern holds for the GT3. After that, we saw that all GT3s like the 996 and 997s stabilized very close to that top. Only a handful of cars displayed this price behavior. Now the new GT3s decreased, but they decreased less than the market average. Moreover, as we just saw, prices were virtually flat during the last year or only came down by a few percentage points. In other words, all models lost less than the market average. Let's put some numbers behind this. Over here we have the US year-over-year price changes for almost all cars that feature on my channel. On the horizontal axis we have the price change compared to last year in percentages. And on the vertical axis we have the number of cars to which this change applies. The average decrease during last year was 8%, and most cars lost between 13 and 4%. Naturally, the GT3s lost much less than the average. If I plot all the models in here, we can see that even the 991.1, so the one with the largest decrease, falls almost in the top 25% of cars that lost the least. The 997 even falls on the positive side of the 0 point. Now all of these price trends are of course no guarantee that these cars will continue to do better than the market in the future. However, also if we dig one level deeper into the data, we can see that there doesn't seem to be much need for concern. Over here we have the development in the carried over inventory. That is, cars that didn't sell within 3 months. If this number increases, cars are spending more time on dealer lots, signifying a decrease in the scarcity level, something that puts downward pressure on the prices. The relationships work vice versa when the rates decrease. We can see, for example, that cars were selling a bit slower between the summer of 2022 and the beginning of 2023. This is when the general market came down with above average rates. We can also see that rates decreased for the 997, 991 and 992 during 2023 and have been relatively stable during the past months. Caution needs to be taken when interpreting the results for the 996s and 997s. A few cars can really offset these rates, so let's focus on the 992 and 991. We can see that since the summer, only between 18 and 30% of the cars were for sale for longer than 3 months. Now in last week's video, we saw for example that F12s and A12s sit approximately between 40 and 50%. I know, a completely different category, but it puts the numbers a bit into perspective. Now even if these cars sit around for a bit longer than 3 weeks, sellers appear to be confident that they're able to sell the car without reducing the price that much. Looking at the price changes for these unsold cars, we can see that they increased compared to last year, meaning that sellers are discounting the car slightly less than last year if it doesn't sell within 3 months. They're confident that a big reduction isn't required to sell. Let's wrap up and conclude. We saw that the complete GT3 market outperformed the car market during last year. 996s and 997s remained very close to their market top of mid-2022, and 991s and 992s lost only a few percentages after they decreased in the second half of 2022. Potentially, the latter two developments are driven by the MSRP increases. So, should you buy a GT3 right now? Let's answer that question by looking at the moment that it definitely wasn't smart to buy a GT3. That is, from a value perspective. The beginning of 2022. Back then prices were topping and cars were selling slower and slower. I even made a video stating that right now is the worst moment to buy a GT3. Going back to the current situation, we can see none of those developments in the data. But that of course doesn't mean that prices won't come down. After all, it's unlikely that we're looking at a market bottom. 992s are for example still very new. Yet, decreases like we saw in the second half of 2023 seem unlikely to me. But all of this talk about future prices is of course pure speculation. I don't have an evidence-based model that can accurately predict GT3 prices. A big economic swing up or down could, for example, cause a destabilization in the prices. But one can question if these low probability events should be part of the decision-making process. That's up for you to decide. Now, if a 911 Turbo is more your thing, I recommend checking out this video over here. Also, they are holding up extremely well. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week for a new video.